Clarity Clinical Solutions.
Imagine a pharmaceutical company runs a clinical trial on a new drug. The trial is completed. Thousands of patients participated. Millions of dollars were spent. But the results are never published. Did that trial really happen? To the scientific community, the answer is effectively no, because unreported results cannot inform clinical decisions, guide future research, or contribute to medical knowledge. And here is the uncomfortable truth: roughly half of all completed clinical trials are never published. Welcome to the hidden side of clinical research, publication bias and missing results. There are three main ways clinical trial results reach the public. The first and most familiar is through peer-reviewed journals, studies published in the New England Journal of Medicine, The Lancet, JAMA, and other medical journals. This is the traditional route, but it can take 1 to 3 years from trial completion to publication, and journals tend to favor novel, positive findings. The second route is through results registries like ClinicalTrials.gov and Registry, government-mandated platforms where sponsors must submit summary results within 12 months of trial completion. And the third is conference presentations and preprints, fast, but lacking the rigor of full publication. Each route has strengths, but none is a complete solution. At the heart of this issue is publication bias, the systematic tendency for studies with positive results to be published more often, faster, and in higher-profile journals than studies with negative or null results. The numbers are striking. Positive results are about 3 times more likely to be published than negative ones. They are published faster, typically within 2 to 4 years, compared to 5 to 7 years for negative results. They appear in higher-impact journals, receive more media coverage, and are cited more often by other researchers. Meanwhile, negative results are often relegated to what researchers call the file drawer: never submitted, never reviewed, never seen. Let us look at the data. Around 50% of all completed clinical trials remain unpublished, that is half of all the research done. Of the published studies, positive results are 3 times more likely to see the light of day than null results. A landmark study in the BMJ found that only 41% of trials registered on ClinicalTrials.gov had published results within 4 years of completion. Even among large, well-funded Phase 3 trials, the most important studies for determining whether a drug works, 29% were still unpublished years after completion. The estimated cost of this waste? About $85 billion per year in biomedical research that is incomplete, unreported, or redundant. There are 3 main reasons results go unpublished. First, sponsor disinterest. If a drug fails in clinical testing, the sponsor has no commercial incentive to publish that failure. In fact, they may prefer to keep the data confidential so competitors do not know what did not work. Second, journal bias. Even when researchers try to publish negative results, they face an uphill battle. Journals reject null findings at much higher rates because they are considered less novel or newsworthy. And third, resource constraints. Publishing a clinical trial takes time, money, and expertise. Open access fees can be $3,000 to $11,000 per paper. For academics whose next grant depends on positive findings, spending months writing up a failed trial can feel like a poor investment. The most important attempt to solve this problem came with the FDA Amendments Act of 2007. This landmark law required most clinical trials to register on ClinicalTrials.gov before they start enrolling patients, and to submit a summary of results within 12 months of completion. This was a huge step forward. For the first time, the public could see what trials were planned and what they found. But the law has a major weakness: penalties for non-compliance are almost never enforced. As of 2023, despite thousands of violations, the NIH had issued exactly 0 fines for missing results. Compliance with registration is high, over 90%, but results reporting compliance hovers around 60 to 70%. Even when results are published, there is another problem: outcome switching. This is when the outcome that was publicly registered as the primary endpoint before the trial began is different from the outcome reported as primary in the published paper. Studies consistently show that 40 to 60% of published trials have discrepancies between the registered primary endpoint and the published primary endpoint. Common tactics include swapping primary and secondary outcomes, dropping unfavorable endpoints, adding new endpoints after the data is collected, and changing how or when outcomes are measured. Most of these changes are not disclosed. Beyond outcome switching, there are other forms of selective reporting. Cherry-picking involves measuring 20 different outcomes and reporting only the one or two that happen to show statistical significance. Subgroup fishing means analyzing dozens of subgroups by age, gender, disease severity, until a significant result emerges by chance, then presenting it as a planned finding. And p-hacking involves running multiple statistical tests, stopping data collection early when significance is achieved, or switching between different statistical methods until the p-value drops below the magic threshold of 0.05. All of these practices inflate the apparent effectiveness of treatments. In response to these problems, a global movement for clinical trial transparency has emerged. The All Trials campaign, launched in 2013 by organizations like Sense About Science, the BMJ, and the Cochrane Collaboration, calls for all past and present clinical trials to be registered and their results reported. The principle is simple: if a trial is not reported, we do not know what happened. The World Health Organization declared in 2015 that results from all clinical trials must be published within 12 months of completion, calling non-compliance scientific and ethical misconduct. The campaign now has over 1,400 endorsing organizations worldwide, including medical charities, universities, and pharmaceutical companies. There is an important difference between publication in a journal and posting results on a registry. Journals select for novelty, clinical importance, and positive findings. They require a verbose narrative manuscript and can take months to years to publish. And crucially, editorial discretion means valid negative results can be rejected. Results registries like ClinicalTrials.gov work differently. They use structured data entry, forcing sponsors to report against their pre-specified endpoints. There is no editorial selectivity, every study gets a results page. And the results are due within 12 months, not years. While registries are less readable than a journal article, they are far more accountable and transparent. Publication bias is not just an academic concern, it has real-world consequences. First, it distorts the evidence base. Meta-analyses that only include published studies overestimate treatment effects by 15 to 30% on average. Second, it causes clinical harm. Patients receive treatments that appear effective in the published literature but are actually ineffective or even harmful when all data is considered. Antidepressants, antivirals, and cardiovascular drugs have all had their true efficacy overstated by publication bias. And third, it wastes enormous resources, an estimated $85 billion per year in biomedical research that is incomplete, unreported, or redundant. There are powerful examples of transparency transforming medical practice. One landmark case is antidepressant reanalysis. In 2008, researchers used the Freedom of Information Act to obtain unpublished FDA data on antidepressants. The published literature showed these drugs as highly effective, but when unpublished trials were included, the benefit for mild to moderate depression disappeared entirely. Clinical guidelines were revised as a result. Another famous case is Tamiflu, the influenza drug. For years, published studies claimed it reduced hospitalizations. After a decade-long campaign, the Cochrane Collaboration finally obtained full clinical study reports and found the drug only reduced symptoms by half a day. Governments had stockpiled billions of dollars worth. The good news is that real solutions exist and are gaining traction. Registered reports are a publishing format where journals peer review and accept a study protocol before the results are known. If the methods are sound, the journal commits to publishing regardless of the outcome. This completely eliminates publication bias for accepted studies. Over 300 journals have adopted this format. Preprint servers like Medrxiv allow rapid sharing of all results, positive or negative, without journal gatekeeping. Data sharing mandates from major funders require raw data to be deposited in public repositories. And stronger enforcement is coming. The European Union's 2022 clinical trial regulation includes financial penalties for non-compliance. So here is the bottom line. Every clinical trial result, positive, negative, or null, is a piece of evidence that matters. When we only see the positive results, we get a distorted, over-optimistic picture of what works. Publication bias is not just an academic problem. It distorts medical evidence, wastes billions of dollars, and most importantly, can lead to patients receiving treatments that do not actually work. The movement toward transparency, through registries, data sharing, open access, and accountable publishing, is one of the most important changes happening in medicine today. Because science works best when the full picture is visible.